All right. Good afternoon, everybody. We've all made it to, I think this is the last session of the day, and I feel like we're competing with wine and after lunch naps. So I appreciate you guys being here and listening to our talk. On stage, I've got myself, Savan, and Jason Pickart, and we're going to be talking about the DoD's customer experience way ahead, specifically around some of the things we're doing with the CXO. If you guys were here for the Fulcrum session, we touched upon some of that. And then Jason will be talking about, he's going to be giving an example of some of the things that we've done with the VA and how we've fixed some of the challenges that we've got there. All right, so again, my name is Savan. I'm actually the CXO for the DoD. A little bit of background, because I actually didn't have a chance to tell you guys where I came from. So as Robert, my deputy, had mentioned, I guess he left as I started talking. Oh, there he is. My background is primarily from industry. So I was the first employee at a place called Redfin. They help you buy and sell homes online. Worked there for a handful of years. I've also had stints at Amazon, and then I've built medical software at a place called Cario. And I've also had a bunch of startups that didn't do too well. But my DoD experience is with, right now with the CXO, but I've also had a 4-year stint at Defense Digital Service. Thanks, Scarlett. And so right now, what we're doing is taking a very hybrid approach of bringing people that have lifelong government experience like Robert and infusing that with people like myself that do have the industry experience. And we feel like that gives us a good mix of having the balance of the speed and agility of the private industry with understanding the complexity of the DoD. And what you guys see up here, almost more importantly than what I have in writing, is this Jenga piece. And I actually didn't play Jenga for a long time, and Robert was like, yeah, we're like a Jenga puzzle. And I was like, what is that? And so he brings up this picture and he shows it to me, and the idea he was trying to convey to me was that with user experience within the department, you actually have to have an understanding of all the pieces that build up this Jenga puzzle, and you have to know strategically the pieces to move in order for you to effectively impact user experience in a positive way. And the minute you move one of the pieces, whether it's tech debt or DBSs or performance monitoring or any one of those things in the wrong way, you could negatively impact this game of Jenga that you have. And so for us, within the CXO, user experience is this multifaceted, very technically complex thing where the CXO specifically is now in a position to be able to look at, in a much broader way, the challenges that we have with user experience. And we do that because we're taking a very data-driven approach to looking at network performance data, looking at user devices, and then being able to continuously gather user feedback so that we can improve user experience within the department. And that's absolutely critical as we start to think about some of the first things that we try to tackle in the next couple years here. Robert had mentioned also, with something like UX within the DoD, when we start to look at issues, we don't look at one singular laptop or one singular battleship. We're looking at fleets of these things. We're looking at massive scale of how we can actually improve user experience within the department. And so I would also say that one of the bigger things that we're doing is trying to really understand how do we position the CXO so that we can actually start to take advantage of the things that we need to do in order for us to bring together the right partners, have the right conversations, understand the pain points that our customers and our partners have, so that we can put the right framework, whether that's deployment of Fulcrum, understanding how do we actually start to gather metrics and data from different systems, and then be able to pull that together analyze it, and then have something that's measurable and understandable that we can communicate out and we can move positively against. So there's a lot of these different challenges that we're facing, but I feel like with the CXO, what we're looking at is really sort of the scale and the breadth of what that looks like within the department. Okay, so I'm going to then talk about sort of why, what, and how. And I've talked about this jobs to be done framework with a bunch of people, but I actually want to ask the audience, what did they have for breakfast? Somebody raise their hand and tell me what they had for breakfast or for lunch. Sir, what did you have? What? Why did you have macaroni and cheese? Robert, can you give that gentleman right there the microphone?
Testing.
Macaroni and cheese because the chicken was dry.
What? And why did you have macaroni and cheese? Did it taste good?
Yeah, because it's comfort food.
And where did you eat it?
At the eating area over there at the end of the
Okay.
conference center.
So it was available to you.
Yes.
Was it fulfilling? Did it sustain you? Do you feel like it did a pretty good job?
For the moment, then I felt bad afterwards.
So you probably hired the wrong thing to do that job. And so where I'm getting at, thank you, sir. Where I'm getting at with this jobs to be done framework is not about trying to identify the merits of macaroni and cheese or the merits of dried chicken. It's really that at the core of what we're trying to do, if you break it down to the fundamentals of what CXO is doing, it's helping our entire department put together the right framework so they can understand how to assess the job to be done. And the idea of a job to be done is that individuals will hire certain products or services to be able to achieve a certain goal. So for yourself, sir, you hired that macaroni and cheese because you were hungry. You probably sat over there. It probably looked good visually, and you ate it, and it was less dry than the alternative, which was the chicken. And so at that moment in time, you thought that macaroni and cheese was probably the right thing for you to hire at that point, if we were putting it in those terms. Now, you could also have buyer's remorse maybe an hour later where you were like, I probably hired the wrong thing. The same idea, if you took that into the commercial world, is when individuals go and they will buy a shake, and they're going through a drive-through, and they really want that shake. And this was a story that was really popularized by Professor Christensen over at Harvard, where he talks about an individual buying a shake because the job to be done was that it kept the person who is buying it, that's going through the drive-through, it kept them satiated. It was very portable. It was very easy to drink with one hand, and it didn't make you feel like garbage like maybe 2 donuts would. And so the idea behind getting to that core of what that job to be done is helping the people that are actually delivering what that looks like a great idea or a more precise idea of why you actually hire things to begin with. Why do you actually invest time in thinking about those things? And so for us, we talk a lot about what that job to be done is and trying to understand what that looks like within the department. And really, that takes me to my second point, which is around, the what it is that we're trying to do. And the what it is that we're trying to do is what we call high-fidelity UX improvements that really targets this jobs to be done framework across the DoD. And I'll give you an example. So as I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in industry, and I worked at Amazon for a while. How many people here use Amazon and don't lie? Okay, pretty much everybody. Let's just pick a random person, Robert, and I want to see who would like to be a volunteer tribute. Who would like to be a tribute? All right, sir.
All right, cool.
All right, sir. What do you use Amazon? You just give us the business friendly answer to this. But what do you use Amazon for?
It's more like, what don't you use Amazon for? Personal products, clothing, household goods.
Yep.
Anything that I can get shipped to my house local that I can't get any, even if I can get it local, but now I have to lug it, but I can get it shipped.
I got it.
Anything.
Do you feel like Amazon does a good job of understanding your tastes, the things that you look for?
Uncannily, yes.
And that is the point, sir. Thank you very much. So what I'm trying to get at with high fidelity user experience is the what. What is it that we're trying to do, and what is it that we're trying to achieve within the department? And the idea here is that in industry, whether you're at Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Snapchat, whatever service that you use, they spend a crazy amount of money, time, engineers, designers to really understand who you are and what makes up that profile that you're actually imprinting in the digital world, so that they can actually tailor their recommendations to what it is that you want to get at that precise time. And the closer that they can get to understanding who you are based on your profile, what you want, what do you need, the better that business is going to be over time. And Amazon does an exceptional job of that. I've seen it firsthand working out on the Amazon Kindle team. And they live or die off of understanding their customers. Now, within the department, we need to take that same mindset where we need to start understanding. Right now, we have a general framework of the department needs X or Y or Z. And in the future, we need to start to get to a more refined and crystallized view, a high fidelity view of what our departments need, of what their users need, and what the warfighters need based on the mission requirements, based on their user profiles and personas, and based on their environments, and then also based on their constraints, right? We can't give them everything at all times, so we need to understand what those things look like. And the high fidelity UX puts together that framework so that we can really start to get into what that looks like. And so we're going to kick that off. It's very early still in its development, but we feel like it's going to be the right approach to understanding what our customers need over the long term. So a little bit about the how. So I talked about the why and the what in a very abstract term, but really, what does the CXO look like, and how do we actually get to the places that we need to get to? The DoD is a massive organization. User experience is a highly ambiguous term, and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And so for us, it was really important in the early days to establish the framework for actually how our office is going to work. And so what we like to do is we like to compare the CXO to a road trip, really. And the idea of a road trip, and how many people here have taken family road trips with their significant other or their kids or their pets? All right, great. Majority of you guys. You will then know that if any one of these things in a road trip goes wrong, you missed a turn, you missed a sign, maybe you didn't have the right car picked out, it's a coupe and you've got 6 people in there and you're crammed in, that road trip will not be pleasant for you when you get to the end of it, right? That's the same thing for the CXO. We've got the analogy of a road trip. So I'll give you 5 pillars of what CXO looks like. So the first pillar is IT governance. The idea behind the IT governance is it's the map for your landscape. How do you know the general geography of where you're going? And really, with IT governance, it's actually also laid out within Fulcrum, is it gives us the tools that we need to be able to track in a very practical way and very scalable and repeatable way the things that we say we're going to do. And the idea is that in the long term, it will help us with cost avoidance, cost savings, and be a lot more effective about the things that we say we're going to do. And also, it will keep us accountable for all the things that we've published. The second piece is around strategic planning. This is the route that you're going to take, right? What's the path? How am I going to get there? And for us, you guys have seen, if you were here for the earlier session, firsthand, one of the things that comes out of strategic planning, which is Fulcrum. you can't have a good user experience without having the ability to understand where it sits within your strategy, and especially where it sits within the department strategy. Some of you may or may not know that we have pockets of excellence everywhere within the department, but without the ability to sort of bring all that together in a cohesive, unified plan, a lot of that, a lot of those pockets of excellence either go unnoticed or they just don't go supported. And so what we're trying to do with the strategic planning piece is bring all that under one umbrella, make sure that they understand what that North Star is, and be able to mobilize against those initiatives. The third piece is going to be around intake. And the idea here is it's your transportation. This is your car. How do we know, how are we going to get there, right? Is it going to be a motorcycle, a van, whatever? The idea behind intake is we are trying to, in a very scientific way, track to see the different ideas that are out there, whether they're from academia, industry, or within the department itself. One of the things that you guys, if you are following the CIO office on LinkedIn or on Twitter, you'll notice that we just put out a nominations for awards. So awards now falls under CXO, and the awards, we're in the 24th year, is that right? We're in the 24th year of the awards. And the reason why we're bringing the awards under CXO is because the whole idea of it is to really understand and discover people that are doing effective things that are contributing to the department in a broad way. And so intake is about sort of getting those ideas, understanding who those players are, understanding what their problems are, and how they actually achieved solving some of those problems, and then bringing that back into the fold so that we can either recognize them or take those things and start to scale that out across many different parts of the organization. The fourth piece is the road signs. That's the performance analysis and improvement. That's a lot of the work that Jason's going to be talking about, so I'm not going to steal his shine. But really, the idea here is how do we ensure that we're staying on course? And Jason will be giving you guys a great example of that. And the fifth piece, and finally the very last piece, is the user experience. And I like to have this last because we actually can't get to a good user experience if you don't have the other four pieces in place beforehand. And I feel like there's many times where we jump the gun and we say, this user experience is bad, well, how do we fix it? Especially for an organization as big as the department. You can't fix it just by skipping all the steps that you need to take in order for you to effectively get to that point, especially if you want it to be sustainable, scalable, secure, all those, and performant, right? Those are all the things that you need to have happen for a good user experience to happen. And so we like to think of that as the result of all these things that we're doing and the result of the things that we're putting into place so that we can get to a great user experience. All right, now I'm going to hand it off to Jason, and I will be taking the mic. Feel free to ask Jason questions about this project, and I will take questions around, so feel free to raise your hands.
Jason likes hard questions too.
I do. Thank you. And as Savan mentioned, as I'm going through this, please do interrupt me as we're having a conversation. I taught for a number of years, so it's like I'm good with that. It's a shared learning environment. This is what I want you to take away from this part of the conversation are practical methods for practitioners. And I'll ask a little bit about what some of our backgrounds are by a show of hands for the audience interaction portion to get a sense of where you are. This particular project was a joint effort in between the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Imagine yourself for a moment as a clinician working at a joint facility where you have a DoD medic, field medic, corpsman, working next to a civilian or a VA physician working on the same patients. And you can't communicate with each other digitally easily. because one of you has a .gov address, one of you has a .mil address, and the other has another .mil address and another .mil address. Consider like a reservist in that kind of environment. Speaking of reservists or guardsmen, are there any reservists in the audience here? Okay, reservist? National Guard. Okay, so you experience this hell, don't you?
we plant them in here?
Right, thank you for joining us. As we're going through this particular use case, you'll probably identify with it very effectively. As Savan mentioned, the jobs to be done, our user in this case were people who needed to deliver health care to active duty, retirees, and veterans over at the VA hospital at the Federal Healthcare Center in North Chicago. It's the James A. Lovell Federal Healthcare Center. It's a little unique because it's co-owned and co-operated with DoD and VA. So we both have appropriations going in to fund that activity on an annual basis. It's also unique because they truly do have a VA patient, an active duty patient, another VA patient, another active duty patient, and it's very fungible, their patient population. As we got together, this team at Norwood was part of a kickoff group within the CIO office as well. We identified the problem that they needed to solve. And sometimes that's just the hardest part. What problem are we trying to solve when it comes to user experience? In this case, they had separate systems. I mentioned the .gov and the .mil, separate PCs. They couldn't log into each other's PCs. They had the DoD computer or the VA computer. And like you, sir, a guardsman, they had multiple identities. So we forced them into like this digital identity crisis whenever they came into work, because which tenant were they going to log into? Or were they going to log into both? Often they did. So we wanted ultimately a consistent, stable, and secure user experience. And when I talk about the secure part, we'll get to it a little bit later, discussing the tenants, one IL2, one IL5 tenant, and being able to try to connect those things. It was a little bit of a challenge from a cybersecurity perspective, but we were able to work through it. And ultimately, so I'm a Jason Pickart, as Savan mentioned a little bit earlier. I'm a Lean Six Sigma practitioner. I'm a master black belt, but within the government, I was a contracting officer for a number of years, and I grew up in acquisitions. So the tech side of the world is a little bit newer to me. Looks like I got to reconnect to my phone. So from a Lean Six Sigma practitioner perspective, what we were really chasing was reducing the number of clicks they had to go through and to improve the process. So we really took a process-centric perspective to this particular project. I'll move us forward into the visuals again. So we also scoped this to really email, collaboration, file sharing, because the electronic health record system, which prior to coming to the CIO, I was a lead contracting officer for MHS Genesis, that was out of scope for this, right? The clinicians use that for clinical stuff. These were really the business applications for them to communicate with one another. So sending an email to each other, an encrypted email, if it happened to have PHI or personal health information, or controlled unclassified information that they were sharing with each other. And then often they were like schedules. Sometimes they would literally print out a schedule, drive it over to the other side of the base, hand it over to somebody else so that they could bang it into their system. It was like insane. So printing and collaboration. And in the process, because again, I'm a Lean Six Sigma practitioner, by the way, how many of you are UX types, user experience types? Okay, got a few of you, all right. How many of you are familiar with TQM, Total Quality Management? Okay, got some of those. Lean Six Sigma, okay, got some of those. There ended up with this particular project a convergence of these communities to where Lean Six Sigma practitioners and TQM, it's all about measurable pieces, right? We want to measure everything. When it comes to the UX community, often it's about delighting the customer. And those of us who try to measure everything, like we have no idea how to measure customer happiness. But we can, right? There are companies who do this. Yelp, for example, 1 to 5 stars on a restaurant, great service, great quality food. Those are measures of customer happiness. In this case, we approached customer satisfaction from a clickology perspective, as Tim Brooks sometimes calls it, who's in our public affairs shop. We measured how many clicks it would take for somebody to do something. So we separated do a process map, value stream mapping, if you're familiar with Lean Six Sigma. We measured the number of clicks somebody would have to take to send an email to one of their colleagues. Now, what we saw in the email process, 35 clicks just to send a dang email to somebody. Well, why does it take so many? Well, if they're not in your global address list, what do? You phone a friend, right? So often we'd end up, hey, what's so-and-so's email address? And then you give it to them and you bang it into your to line because you couldn't find them in your own global address list. And if you're on the industry side, we talk about encrypted emails. Whenever, contracting officer here, whenever you send controlled unclassified information, of course it's encrypted, right? To a government person, yes. But one of the first things you have to do is exchange those encryption certificates, right? So send me a signed email, you go through that hokey pokey. So that takes up to 37 clicks because you got to do the encryption certificate swap before you can actually send something encrypted. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Lean Six Sigma, you'll notice that there are some green and some pink process steps up here. I would encourage you, as you evaluate processes, to use a particular method. It's the value-added versus a non-value-added process step. So the green process steps pass 3 tests. 1, they change the form, fit, or function. The customer wants it, and it's done right the first time. If it fails any one of those tests, then it is a non-value-added process step. Unless it's required by law, regulation, or policy, right? Then it becomes a non-value-added but required process step. That's the part of the method we use to understand the pain that our customers were going through. And common user experience measures are time on task, or customer satisfaction, or system usability scale. In this case, we went with something relatively rudimentary, was just the number of clicks to be able to do something. And as we moved forward, we asked the customer what they wanted. And as this is a common Lean Six Sigma kind of ask the customer in general, what do you want? And then translate that into something specific and measurable. So as you can see, I want to encrypt in 2 clicks. Moved from 37 to 2. That's what the customer wanted. To not duplicate logins. Remember, like our guardsman here, you have multiple identities, right? And whenever you go anywhere, you got to figure out which identity am I going to be. So what the customer wanted is one identity, to where they didn't necessarily have to log into their .gov and their .mil box. They also wanted to share files easily, and they wanted that in 3 clicks. Historically, they'd print something out, drive it across over to the other location, give it to their friend to bang it into their system, or they'd email it. right? Which could take up to 37 clicks if it's controlled unclassified information, which is also PHI. And then collaborating in real time. That was the part that they wanted to be able to co-author and co-edit documents. Now, for those of us who use Office 365, these things don't sound like too much of a lift. But when you're talking about a cross-tenant IL2 to IL5 situation, that becomes a little bit more challenging, right? IL2, IL5, for those of you, I'm not that great of a technologist, but that has to do with the security of the tenants themselves. We'll go with that. So what we ended up doing is, this is a build-out slide. You'll see on the left-hand side the DHA, or sorry, the VA tenant. So that was on an IL2 situation. On the right-hand side, the big cloud, that's Defense Health Agency's IL5 tenant. So what we ended up doing is turning on something called B2B. It's within the Microsoft's, it's a Microsoft capability you can use in any of your tenants on Entra or Azure, to where each tenant would recognize the other's guests. So we created guest account access for each one of those tenants across from the IL2 to the IL5 and from the IL5 to the IL2. It was a lot easier going from 5 to 2 versus 2 to 5. That was a little challenging. With that, we imported the certificates from their PIVs and their CACs, and then we swapped those across the two organizations. Now, our goal yes?
Did you say it was easier to go from IL5 to IL2 or IL2 to 5?
Thank you. Great question. It was easier to go from two IL5 folks going into the IL2 tenant versus IL2 folks coming into the IL5 tenant. That's like low high kind of situation. Does that help? Mainly because the cybersecurity community within DoD was worried about VA users coming into the IL5 environment and, let's say, grabbing information that really only the DoD folks needed to know. Right. So from a user perspective, we wanted the DHA folks, Defense Health Agency, those active duty members who were providing care, and the VA users to use either computer. Didn't matter which network they were on. As well as remote access for those who were teleworking. Because, hey, we've got telework care or remote care. That is a thing, especially for any of those of you who are retirees. We do have distance care. I can't remember the term off the top of my head, but we do have that as a capability for our retirees and VA, the veteran employees as well, veteran status patients. From the IL5 to IL2 portion, the sensitivity labels were a part that gave us the ability to do that. And that's the little thing up there. That enabled the folks at DoD to identify data or a document that was for DoD only, or the data that was in the message or in the document was PHI, but it was shareable with anybody in the clinical community. And by identifying, using those sensitivity labels, that really got the team through that. It got our cybersecurity community over the hump when it came to VA users coming into the IL5 tenant. Also, for anybody at FHCC, all of the VA staff have gone through background investigations so that they can work on military installations as well. So that particular population made it easier for us to be able to do that. And through these guest accounts, that meant each organization could use things like OneDrive, Microsoft Teams. They'd be able to chat each other, send an instant message. And with anything that's on Microsoft Teams for chat, it goes into a SharePoint Online library, a SPO library. So that's exactly how the teams were using that as guests in each other's tenants. Also, with that B2B turn on, they were currently able to co-author and co-edit documents in Microsoft products. So, like if they're creating a schedule on Excel, like a lot of folks do, then they'd be able to share that across their tenants very easily. And then for those who really wanted to do the old-timey kind of email, I'm going to share a file with you type. I don't know if any of you identify that way here. But we also created a GAL sync, or a global address list sync, a runbook that synchronizes every hour in between the Defense Health Agency and the VA tenant. That way they could actually find each other in the global address list. And because we used those certificates and brought them in as guests, the certificates also went into the global address list, to where they didn't necessarily have to do the let's exchange certificates hokey pokey any longer. Now, this particular project, we were not able to get to encryption in 2 clicks. Got it to 9. If they didn't want to drag and drop a document across Teams. So if they would still wanted to do the old-timey email each other kind of email or a document, we got to 9 clicks because of the GAL sync. As for file sharing in 3 clicks, we got to 1 because it's a drag and drop. Unless they wanted to do the old-timey email thing each other, right? And the collaborate in real time through the guest tenants, or through being guests in each other's tenants, they were able to do that through those standard business Microsoft products. So this is a way that we approached user experience in a specific problem. We mapped the value stream. We asked the customer what they really wanted. We converted that into something specific and measurable, and then we got after that particular problem set. And through this project, we figured out that we can leverage a lot of our Lean Six Sigma community to be able to increase or enhance user experience across the department. Now, the Lean Six Sigma practitioners and TQM folks aren't going to do design per se, but when it comes to enhancing productivity and time on task, those are real key measures that we can use across the department to be able to enhance user experience. So with that, we'll move over into question time, if you have any.
Yeah, let me, Jason, thanks for that. Let me just say one thing here as we close up. So Jason just gave a fabulous example about how we helped the VA with the communications problem. And I know what you guys are thinking. You're thinking Savan's a big fat liar because he's been talking about frameworks and strategy and all these things. And you come up here and you talk about a specific project, which in and of itself is not a framework or a strategy. And I'd like to say there are a handful of projects that we have worked on. This is one of them. We're working on a couple other different ones that I won't talk about. Right, I wasn't going to bring that up, but there's a couple other ones that we're working on. And the reason why that's important, everybody, is because the best way to be able to convey the importance of this process and show our partners how to go through these things is to actually pick a big, hairy problem and go through it and document it and learn from it. In addition to a lot of the things that we're doing with Fulcrum, we want to be able to give tangible evidence and advice to problems that are real for our service members, real for the rest of the department, and we can actually go back and look to see if what we did was effective or not. And so, Jason, thank you for the example of that. With that being said, I do want to bring up Colt and Robert. Colt Whittle is the former CXO for our team. Robert Friends is my deputy. We will take any questions about user experience. If your computer's not working, I am not the best person to talk to, but we will take any questions around any of the things that we've briefed today. You guys want to sit right there? And I know it's late, so we'll try to get you out here as quickly as possible. All right, sir. Can you give me your name and where you're from?
Glenn Thomas with Throughline. We work with this quite a bit. One of the questions we have is, or one of the challenges in UX is user testing. Do you find in the DoD that it's a challenge trying to get things done fast and not necessarily invest in the time and effort for testing?
Yeah, Colt, you're probably the best. You want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, and we get this pushback a lot. I can say this as a former, I came out of some digital agencies prior to being CXO, you probably know. And you get this situation where you're working to improve user experience of applications, you're redesigning applications. In order to do that, you got to have access to users. There's a very structured process that you go through. I'm saying this for the benefit of all the folks here. And then your client on the government side says, oh, wait a minute, we have this expert here who can tell you everything you need to know about the requirements for the design of this. And meanwhile, there's 10,000 airmen or soldiers, sailor Marines, that use this thing. You have no access to any of them. That doesn't work. It doesn't fly. It just, you can't do it that way. I mean, you would never design any digital product anywhere without having the ability to actually put it in front of the people that you intend to get something accomplished with and see if they can actually do it or not. An expert in the middle doesn't solve that problem for you. So what I would say, and when I was in the CXO chair, I often did this. I would just, and I still would do this today, anyone, whether you're a consultant or a government person or and you need help trying to kind of intervene and convince your client on the government side that, wait a minute, I need access to some people here, I'd be happy to help.
Savan, if I may.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Robert.
So, if you're from industry and you're trying to drive people to your site for commerce or to buy something or whatever, user experience is a driver of making revenue for your company. So if it's not intuitive or adaptive or people have too many clicks or whatever, what do? They go to the competition that offers a better user experience to get the same product. What's different about the DoD is we don't really have competitors. So sometimes we don't take user experience seriously. So user design on the front end is very important. But the other side of that, though, is we also have to remember managing user expectations. So I'll give an example. If the job to be done is to get to work, I'm an old guy. I don't need a self-driving electric car, right, where I can text my girlfriend and upload pictures of my cats while I'm driving to work. And I'm fine with a car that's got the windows rolled down. Maybe it's not air conditioned, because the job to be done is to get me to work. And so this is where we, as leaders in DoD, when we're managing user expectations, is that we don't necessarily have the funds to give everybody a self-driving car. So when their definition of a good user experience is a self-driving car where they can kick back and do everything, if the job to be done is just to get to work, what they might call a bad user experience, because they have to ride in the non-air conditioned car with the windows rolled down, so they think that that's a bad user experience. So user-centric design on the front, totally critical, and we don't sometimes do a good job at that. But at the same time, we also have to manage expectations in terms of what do we have the resources to deal with, how do we prioritize those resources when we're delivering applications and capabilities and experience online. So that's the challenge for us, is we have to balance that.
Glenn, was that your name, sir? Glenn, that's I think to both to both points up here, the other thing I would add, and you specifically called out user testing, is that right? Specifically with user testing, one of the things that we're doing, we just had our first UX Summit a couple weeks ago where we brought in members from all the military branches, plus DISA and a bunch of other partners. And, one of the things that we're doing is really trying to uncover some of the tools, some of the practices, some of the processes that everybody's using so that we can start to see what's effective in terms of how they're approaching things like user testing. And so, primarily we were looking at, things like metrics and things that they were looking at. But I think to your point, what are some of the tools that they're using to measure what's effectively being done by the users and how do you actually report against that is something that we'll need to look at. Unlike an industry where, if you're out and you see a tool on a website and you like it, you just go and you buy it and you bring it in. If people are here in the DoD, it's not as easy within the department to do that. And so one of the things that we're trying really hard to do is bring together the players, see sort of like what people are doing that's effective, and then being able to sort of communicate that back out to a wider audience. And so for CXO, we sort of we have this opportunity to sit right in the middle where we can start to see that bigger landscape and see what all the other players are doing. That's a great question, though. Anybody else? Yes, sir. What's your name and which organization are you with?
Ken Wright with Broadcom. So one of the things we see in the news a lot is retention issues in the department. So could you and the panel comment on how the user experience or a poor user experience is impacting retention?
Yeah.
That's a fantastic question. I don't know. Who wants to take that? I think any one of us could.
I got a couple of thoughts.
All right.
Right after I took the CXO gig, there was a retention study being done by the Air Force Survey Office. This was about, you could probably get it online. I want to say it was around 2019, 2020. And we added a question to the survey because it was digging into like, why do people separate? And so we added a question. Actually, we added in the basically the question like, why are you thinking of separating, or why did you separate it? And we put like IT issues or friction with common tasks. We put some things in there, and there wasn't a huge correlation like with people who were separating. Like I thought it would pop into, the top few things. Like if you look at studies that have been done by Gartner and others, IT and really, if you look at the top reasons why people separate, it's usually like bad boss and got better money elsewhere. So I didn't expect IT and friction related to common tasks to like pop into that category. But I expected it to be higher than it was. And it was actually kind of low. However, anecdotally, when you talk to, in my case, airmen, when you talk to airmen, these things come up all the time. And it's usually not, if you ask them like, does IT, would it cause you to separate? It's not the right way to ask it. It's more about, do annoying friction kinds of things give you a bad feeling about the Air Force or the Space Force or the Army or Marines or Navy or whatever? How does that make you feel about the organization, and does it cause a headache for you and your family? And you get a lot of stories about that. So I don't have a good answer to your question. I don't, because I tend to speak from data, and I don't have hard data that says there's a connection. Anecdotally, it feels like there's a connection. The hard data, inconclusive in my mind.
So, great question, by the way. It's a real problem. If you look in Fulcrum in LOE4, when you get the opportunity to read it, which is about recruiting, retaining, cultivating a digital workforce, we're talking about wanting to grow new people to come to work in DoD, in the IT community. I talked earlier today about how we're not really able to compete financially. It's about people that are dedicated to the national security mission. But LOE4 recognizes that if we want to get young people to come and work here and stay here, what we're giving them now isn't good enough to when you think of the military, I got the greatest state-of-the-art stuff, blah, 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 blah. And then they come in and we lock them in a secure room. They can't have their cell phones. I love it when I telework because I got my government cell phone, my personal cell phone. I got my personal computer up doing webmail. I got my government computer doing up. I got like 4 screens going. I can multitask. I'm a machine when I'm not in the office. When I'm in the office and I'm bridled by a skiff, right? My productivity, I'm working on 85% of what I'm working on is not secure information. I don't really need to be performing these jobs in a skiff. My productivity's crummy. Young people aren't interested in that work environment. It's not enticing to them. If you do get them in the door, they don't want to stay. So I want to read to you what success looks like in Fulcrum, right? It says, our digital workforce is engaged in learning through academic experiences, mentorships, and development opportunities. Okay. Employees have a hybrid flexibility in where and when they work. They have state-of-the-art tools that enable remote work and virtual collaboration. So we do need to start actually thinking about as leaders, and when we're talking to our leaders about what our digital workplace looks like and the capabilities that we need to mirror what's in industry. Because when I joined the military, my first DD-214 was a carbon copy on a typewriter, right? There was no such thing as a computer. I see you out there shaking your heads, right? So, but the new workforce, they're not interested in this, and that's why LOE4 and Fulcrum is so important. There's the data aspect, like what Colt's talking about, but then there's like the philosophical, like, well, what are we doing and what are we offering that culturally we need to start thinking about? This is a great question.
Let me add one more thing, just to foot stomp what Robert said. If you go back to the Fix My Computer memo, right? If you go to Google and search on Fix My Computer, Michael Kanan, the guy did me a giant favor, made it vastly easier for me to do my job as CXO. Seriously, I owe him an entire case of wine, probably. Actually, that somebody sent him that, and then he literally texted me, and he's like, "Chateau Petrus, 1995."
They sent him a case of wine for you?
No, I did not. But basically, he's collecting receipts apparently, and wants me to actually send him a case of wine. So, I'll be taking donations to buy Robert Michael Kanan. Anyway, but so the Fix My Computer memo, essentially what it pointed out was the disconnect, which, young people entering the military pick up on this very quickly. They pick up that there is a massive disconnect between the military experience we sell, right? The most technically advanced military on the planet, the most lethal, the most, all of it, right? And then I come to work and, 36% of PCs are older than 4 years. And you're like, they pick up on that pretty darn quick, and everything else Robert just talked about. So, can I say for sure there's a hard, connection? I can't say that for sure, but anecdotally, you hear it a lot.
Fantastic question. All right, sir, you got it.
Jeff Waters with Riverbed. Colt, I know you were trying to get some of this solved a bit with procurement, putting some things in packages that say address customer experience, how you're going to improve. Just wondering if that's got any momentum or if you're seeing anything or plan to keep doing that.
Yeah, so not enough. So I think what Jeff is referring to is, and I wish it would get more motive. But honestly, this is something, people are, well, what can I do to help? Okay, here's something everyone here can do to help. I assume, how many people are on the contractor side of things? Yeah, so most of you. Okay, so here's something you can do. So, and we got this approved. There is a thing that I didn't realize existed. It is called the Acquisition Tools, Techniques, and Procedures, or Acquisition TTPs. And this is at the Air Force, but the rest of DoD can use this. And quite honestly, it's something we should probably make available to the rest of DoD through DAU or somebody. And essentially what it is, it's a set of sample language that can be pasted into an RFP, into a Section L and Section M, to help strengthen the UX requirements of almost any IT contract for the performance work statement and the evaluation criteria. So it's the UX acquisition TTP. There's a white paper I put out. If you Google my name and Medium, you can read it on Medium. But it is an approved TTP on the US acquisition TTP site. So what you can do as a contractor is when you're talking to your government client or contract officer or whomever, you can say, hey, are you aware of this? Because you say you want a better user experience. Turns out there's language out there. You can put in a solicitation and point them in that direction. There's nothing wrong with that. So highly recommend that. And honestly, it's something we should think about making more use of.
So a couple things. I don't know if y'all remember CMO. CMO used to certify IT budgets in the department. And so part of the fulcrum, next step actions with the implementation plans or whatever is aligning. CIO now does the capabilities programming guidance now where we certify the funds for DoD IT. So going forward, part of the long-term plan is that the certification of IT budgets and stuff is going to be tied to fulcrum. So that's going to help to start shape addressing the things in here from performance, old computers, and things like that. Not a stick, but visibility, situational awareness, enticement to go after these things. And then the other thing is if you look in fulcrum in optimization of the DoD or DoD Foundation, there's a specific OKR in there called reduce tech debt ratio across the department. Reducing tech debt ratio, while there are some things that we can do that don't cost money, the big lift of that is resources to reduce that iceberg, that tech debt iceberg under the water. So that is of the 72 OKRs in here, for lack of a better word, that is a fundamental tech debt reduction ratio there. So that's going to be an indicator of measuring, are we putting more resources towards tech debt, which is getting rid of the old stuff, having newer laptops, that sort of stuff. So that is a fundamental in the fulcrum strategy that we released yesterday.
Yeah, Jeff, that was a great question. And to sort of bring that back into a little bit more plain speak, and we'll have time probably for one more question. Is that right, Tim? One more? Okay. I do want to say that within the CXO, we are looking at all the levers from acquisitions to strategy to technical pieces, technical tools, and trying to figure out what levers we can pull now versus what levers we need to start to invest in the future to be able to get us the most amount of traction. And depending on where you are in the cycle or where you are in the year or what resources we have, right now we're a team of 5, you can only do so much, right? And so there's a lot of that balance that we have to do to be able to effectively know which levers we want to pull and at which times. Okay, last question.
Well, that gentleman right there had his hand up too.
Okay, you are two questions left. Two questions. And then I have to catch an Uber.
Okay. Hey, who's the 5th person, by the way? I only count us 3 and you. There's 5 people in CXO. Did we get another employee that I don't know about? Or okay.
Amazon always says the empty chair is the customer.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
We're going to use that.
Yeah, cool. I was just thinking, like earlier you were saying that the users said they wanted to do secure emails in 2 clicks. I've never heard a customer say that. They would say, I want it in 0 clicks. So I don't know where you get 2 clicks. But what the customer is asking for and what's actually deliverable oftentimes are a mismatch. And asking a customer what they would like is certainly a nice thing to do. However, there's like other measurement techniques. How do you compare the desire for something versus like what you think would be efficient? Example being, I could do it in 2 clicks or 5 clicks, but it takes 5 minutes, or I can do it in 8 clicks and it takes 30 seconds. That basically the mechanics versus the desire, and how do you balance that?
It's a great question. So in the business world, you would never just only listen to users. There's also context, business context, right? I'm trying to get more products, not just in the shopping cart, but out of the shopping cart and credit card swiped. You know what I mean? So you do the same thing. You know, just listening to users is very important, but it is just one sensor. There's other important context things. There's other important business metrics. People often ask me, like, okay, Colt, what should we be measuring for UX? And there's a lot of things that are good to measure for user experience, and they're helpful, and we can talk all day about them. It's one of my favorite topics. However, the most important UX measure is the mission measurement that, or KPI that you're trying to hit, right? You know, if it's whatever it might be, bombs on target or whatever it might be, that at the end of the day is the mission metric that UX is trying to achieve, right? You know, I often talk about, you know, the example of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Fitz and B-17s in World War II. And basically, the gist of the story is we were losing hundreds of them, and often they would survive flying over Europe and dropping bombs. And they would come back so full of flack. If you go see, what's the Warriors of the Sky, whatever it is, on Apple TV, phenomenal show. But they would come back to Europe, and some percentage of them would fly the plane into the ground because they opened the bomb bay doors instead of putting the landing gear down or other similar stuff. And so Lieutenant Colonel Fitz, I'm simplifying the story dramatically, but Lieutenant Colonel Fitz was essentially engaged by the Army Air Corps to go study, you know, pilots and figure out why we had such bad pilots that they would do something like that. And then he looked at the data of all the crashes and figured out that, well, we don't have a pilot problem. We have a problem with the design of the planes. The controls are too easy to make an error. At the end of the day, the user experience metric in that case was loss of life and loss of mission, loss of equipment. And so that's, I think, the right way to think about user experience.
So I just want to go to Jason real quick, because I think this sort of is an example of like how he did a deep dive. So one of the cool things about getting a Lean Six Sigma practitioner like a Jason is that he doesn't have any IT bias or certain system bias. He's all about facilitating what I would call, what's the problem that we're trying to solve. So you know, Jason, if you wanted to take a second there was a specific problem, a user experience problem that was impacting mission, that they had a problem to be solved in context, like Colt's talking about. And so, Jason, you can, you know, take the rest of that home.
Right. To your point, clicks are not necessarily the right measure. And frankly, we worked that project before the CXO existed. And so we stood up in 5 months ago. It was only until after we stood up this customer experience office did I understand that time on task was a much better measure for executing those things. And as Robert said, as a Lean Six Sigma practitioner, okay, I got to measure something. Is it going to be time? Did we have a sample size large enough to be able to measure time and take a look at things from a bell-shaped curve? And within the 6-month period, we frankly didn't have the luxury to be able to collect that much data because that data was going to be expensive for us. So we just went with, okay, clicks. We'll go with that. And to your point, dwell time or time on task are typically much better measures, especially as you're growing out your sample size.
All right, last question. Joe, you want to take us home?
Question for Jason. Lessons learned. So obviously you're working with a vendor. We have private industry in the audience here. The private industry here is used to working with one agency, not necessarily both in the sense of a product. Like, so VA gets a product, DoD gets a product. What are some good lessons learned, DTPs, takeaways that you could take away with that private vendor, working with that private vendor, either that the private vendor, these guys could take away on how better to integrate products within agencies, or how can we work better with the VA for that?
Because there were a few artifacts that we used. One was a charter, and we chartered a team to solve this particular problem. leveraging a charter was helpful because one, with that within that charter, you saw the elements of the goal statement, right? And then we also developed a problem statement, understanding who was having the problem, what was the problem, where was it occurring, how long did it happen, and why the heck should we fix it? And then the goal statement associated with it. And the folks who were part of that charter were the government folks, because the industry partners and contracting officer at the time, the industry folks wouldn't necessarily be part of that charter as individual named folks, but we did bring that vendor or that contractor as part of the decision-making process as we were setting out the charter. And then the specific and measurable portions of that, as Colt and I have been working together a little bit more, he's been learning a little bit more about the Lean Six Sigma community and how we measure things. And then Savan has also come in for another project on a different platform we're working on, to where we're getting a better sense of how the UX community measures things. And there's a lot of great symbiosis in between that UX and the Lean Six Sigma community to leverage tools that we all kind of use to a little bit more of a standard set.
All right.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I know that we just heard that beep, so
Hook.
the hook to tell us to hurry up. But I just want to say I appreciate you all sitting here, listening to CXO's mission and listening to some of the things that we're doing. If you have any questions, I think maybe there might be a few of us that'll stick around to answer any questions. But yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.